Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested.
And it's Jeremy from Tested.
Welcome to Projections, our weekly show about VR and AR. And this week we're going to be talking about an aspect of VR that we haven't talked about before, VR for travel and education.
Right, photogrammetry in particular. There was a small part of the lab, which was part of the Vives free package that you download from Steam, that was photogrammetry, and it seemed very compelling. It's like you can photograph zones just using just a camera, and bring that into a 3D environment that you can actually explore and move around.
Yeah, I believe Valve's Adam Foster at the time went traveling, and photogrammetry is a technique that previously had been used to create models of objects, but you can do it for environments as well, and if you have the geometry, you have the texture, then you can plop yourself in VR. And some people have been doing it at home, but on the high end, we were curious what very high quality photogrammetry would be like if you have the best computers you could buy and the best photographic equipment you can have.
And LiDAR.
And LiDAR scanning. So this company, Kiser, actually this week just released a photogrammetry VR app called Masterworks, and we were able to visit their office and chat with them about their scanning process and processing for VR.
So we're a nonprofit based here in Oakland, California. Our mission is to capture, share, and archive the world's cultural heritage. So we capture these places in accurate 3D. We archive it in case something happens to these sites, if in case of destruction or damage. And we also make this data available in interesting ways to people, such as in VR.
So I know that you've been doing this since 2003. I imagine that the tools that you use to capture these spaces in 3D have evolved over the years. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we originally started using LiDAR or laser scanning. You can see one of the instruments there behind you. That was our primary technology because we were founded by one of the early pioneers of LiDAR. He developed one of the first commercial applications of the technology in the 90s and then decided to adapt it for use for good in 2003 to record cultural heritage. And since then we've been morphing more towards using photogrammetry, drone imagery, and combining that all into one coherent data set to build a very accurate 3D model.
Because the LiDAR will only give you the 3D model, right?
Exactly. It gives you like very, very accurate geometric information, like basically a cloud of points that describe the surface, but it doesn't give you any color or texture information. So all of that comes from the drone or from the DSLRs.
So back 15 years ago when you had that geometry, very high fidelity geometry, what was the experience like capturing when you go on site? I imagine you're spending a couple of days with a tripod, with a system like that.
Yeah.
And what are you looking to gather? And at that point, how are you looking to disseminate it?
So our goal originally was to capture a very accurate, geometric record of the sites. So we'd move this instrument around. It used to take a lot longer. It used to take maybe an hour per scan. Now they take anywhere from 2 to 6 minutes.
Wow.
So we'd move this around to the different areas of the site to get all the different occlusions, and from that we'd build a very accurate geometric model. So most of the time we didn't have any texture information. It was just the very accurate geometry, down to about plus or minus 2 millimeters.
And how recent was it that you decided that texture and color and that visual information was going to be important and more importantly, usable for everyone? And what were your first experiments in that space?
Probably in the late 2000s, some of those early projects, like 2007 in Tikal, doing
those are
texture.
Some of the earliest projects when we worked with the software developers to actually have that ability to map color onto these point clouds.
Yeah.
So what is that process like? Has that always been something that you have had to do manually, or was that automated from the beginning? I imagine fusing those two data sets it doesn't sound trivial.
No, we do fuse the data sets now, both the photogrammetric and LiDAR data.
Yeah.
But back in the day, we actually just mapped 360-degree imagery onto the cloud of points.
Oh.
So we would use a panoramic rig. We would take this off, put the panoramic rig on, line up those nodal points.
Make sure the tripod stays exactly the
same. We build custom little extensions so that the point where the laser beam exited and the point where the light enters the lens were at exactly the same spot. Then we create a panoramic equirectangular image and then actually map pixels to points. So click 10 or 12 points for every scan. You can imagine how labor intensive it used to be.
But you couldn't explore those spaces, right?
You could, you could explore the cloud of points.
Right.
But even 10
spaces.
years ago, the textured spaces, so you don't have the fidelity, and you're on a high-end computer, and you're using custom proprietary software. Right. So basically, no one could actually view this
The output
data.
was usually like a 3D fly-through, so a 3D animation that we could put on YouTube or something. That was about as immersive as you could get in those days.
And of course, thanks to game engine video games, essentially technology that allows taking geometry and texture mapping and VR, then we can now be in those spaces.
Yeah.
Now we've worked and we've spoken to a lot of people who have experimented in photogrammetry, where they might have a drone or they might have their DSLR, take a couple hundred photos, and use an off-the-shelf piece of software to create a location that they can explore. What's an example of a data set that you are working with? Since you're not necessarily building this just for photogrammetry, you also have your other purposes.
An example of a data set is we're using LiDAR, and we have anywhere from 100 to 300 scan locations. And we're using photogrammetry, and we have anywhere from, we can have 10,000 photos all the way up to 90,000 photos. So we're not just doing 200 photos around a little object. We're mapping that same object and the same fidelity around an entire heritage site. So it can be many kilometers.
Yeah, 4 terabytes, 5 terabytes, 6 terabytes of data ends up being a lot of data. And the reason we do that is we want to create an accurate record of what's there, but we also want to create engineering drawings. So archaeologists and conservators and researchers can analyze the site. They might be looking for damage or doing deformation monitoring. There are usually some high precision uses that they have for the data. So our requirements are way up here, even though if we're just producing it for VR, they might be a lot lower than that.
So let's talk about the VR title that's coming out this week now. So what were the 4 sites that you chose, and why did you choose those from your archives for the VR title?
So the 4 we chose were 4 of our more recent projects, so they contain some of the best data. They also have a theme that's kind of related to climate change. So 3 of them are heavily affected by climate change. 1 in Peru, 1 here in the United States, 1 in Thailand, all affected in different ways. And then there's a bonus site, Mount Rushmore, which people can explore in, linked up with President's Day weekend that's coming up on Monday.
And these were all sites that you had used your latest techniques on, so that lent itself to the VR experience as well, I see.
Exactly, because we have the best texture data and it provides the best immersion and visual quality, and I think users will see that in the app.
Yeah.
When you talk about the fidelity being really important for all the purposes you're using this for, is that in how the objects are related to each other on a macro scale or a micro scale? Like, are you, when you're on site, is looking under every crevice and making sure you get that texture data important? How granular do you go down to?
I think it's both macro and micro. We might be looking at, like deformation across the whole site. It could be like up to 1 kilometer long. It could be anything down to a crack that is maybe 3-4 centimeters in length, so like an inch. So anything from centimeter scale all the way through to the kilometer. I think we want to maintain that accuracy across the site. And I think that also lends itself to that kind of visual immersion, or visual quality that you'll see in the experience as well. And I think that's, these are 4 fully open, explorable environments. They're not 360 photos. You can move around, freeform in the environments. You can explore every nook and cranny. I think that's what makes this experience unique.
There are 360 photos in it that
there are
you
also.
can choose to experience. Why the decision to include those 360 nodes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we built out the 3D environments for certain portions of the site, and then there were areas we wanted to include in the story that were actually much further away from that core area. So we captured 360 photos to transport you to other locations and tell other parts of the story. That location might be, half a mile away, it could be 10 miles away, but we couldn't create a fully explorable 3D environment that would be that big, across multiple miles.
And that's not photogrammetry, those 3D photos. They're spherical stereo photographs. What is the process like to create those?
The process to create those is pretty arduous. We created a custom rig using 2 Sony mirrorless cameras, and with traditional just like a 24mm lens, we put the cameras on this rig so the spacing is the same spacing as the human eye, and take around 72 pictures around and process 2 360s. So we have a left pair and a right pair. And then put those together and kind of stack them and run them in the game engine.
How big of an area can you, I mean, the areas are wide ranging with the experiences you have, and some that may be restrictive based on what you want to capture, but theoretically, how big of a physical area can you map out?
Probably a function of the time on site.
Yeah.
So, normally for these projects, we spend about 5 to 7 days, which probably translates to maybe like a quarter by a quarter mile at most. Would that make sense? Does that sound about right? Yeah.
A quarter by a quarter mile.
Yeah.
And that's the environment, so what you can walk around, and then changing that fidelity as you get closer to an object or a feature or something like one of these temples you get to explore. So we capture that at a higher fidelity, and we capture that surrounding context, using drones and aerial imagery where we don't need quite the fidelity.
And then you can build just basically essentially a 360 environment around that.
Exactly.
That's beyond that.
So yeah, exactly. So we just the same thing where we're doing those 3D 360 panoramic images. We're then using that as your environment map, so you get that real sense of immersion in the site.
Now, what we're experiencing in VR is nowhere near the potential of the imagery you have. So how do you go about choosing how to reduce your data set, essentially, to something that's going to be running at 90 frames a second in a VR headset?
How painful is that?
Yeah.
That is probably the biggest challenge.
Scott has that pain.
We're dealing with a finished model that can be in the billions of polygons. And at the end of the day, just for the geometry, we need about 1.5 million polygons to put that in a game environment and run that on 90 frames a second.
Total?
Yes.
Wow. So you build out the full model already.
We build out the full model, and that's what really helps the engineering grade drawings and the conservation aspect of it. So we have that high fidelity. So in that geometry, you can actually observe that crack that's 2 millimeters wide or 2 millimeters long. But when we put that in the gaming environment, that same little crack or that same where we had maybe 3,000-4,000 triangles in that small area, we now have one.
Is that an automated decimation process, or?
There's some automated algorithms that do the process, but more and more it's pretty manual, where we're selecting areas selectively, where to keep detail, where not to keep detail.
Geometry and textures?
Both.
Yeah.
So we have an amazing artist team that can really fine-tune that. So we can tune where we want the most polygons. We can also tune where we want the most UVs or the maps. So determining that pixel resolution over a surface of a mural, we obviously want a lot more fidelity. So we would increase that resolution.
What about the lighting? Because I assume on location, like you'd love to pause the sun, right? But you can't. So you have to complete everything so that it looks like the same time of day. And then you're bringing it into a game engine where you now have real-time lighting capabilities. How do you choose to use those, or do you stick with the natural texture light?
That's why cloudy days are our dream. That's what we hope for every day.
We love working in the UK. It's perfect most of the time. But to answer your question, we're not using real-time lighting right now. We're just using the lighting conditions we're given. So when we're on a site for 5 days, we strategically capture that in a 1 or 2 hour window, so we really don't see the sun change that much. So we might have to capture the east facade from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. And then the next day come back and capture the west facade and look at the weather patterns. It's very critical. We make sure we're dealing with the same lighting conditions strategically to figure out when we're working inside or outside. Obviously inside we control the lights.
Is the decision not to use real-time lights a stylistic choice or a technical limitation?
Right now, it's, I think, a stylistic choice, and it also allows us to work a lot quicker.
Yeah.
We have a fairly small team, and to do de-lighting across that many maps.
De-lighting?
Right? Yeah, to de-light you can de-light scenes.
Flat it out.
Flat it out, yeah.
Wow.
So you can do that. That's probably our next foray into game engines is going to be the real-time lighting.
Is that something that's purely post-process, or something that even in the capturing phase, you could adjust the technology or the imaging equipment?
I mean, we can start doing it with working with a bigger dynamic range in the images, HDR and things like that, or start using these cameras that just have huge bit depth.
Oh my gosh.
So this is a phase 1, and it has gigantic, 24-bit, amazing, more dynamic range. So that really helps us in post-processing. Those raw images have so much data. You could have a white pixel and a black pixel and kind of bring them together.
Is this an example of the camera you use for photogrammetry?
This is one of the pieces of equipment we do use for photogrammetry.
Wow.
So this is a phase 1 Q3 body, and is a 100 megapixel sensor. So it's pretty ridiculous. You don't handhold this guy.
Not your typical consumer DSLR.
No.
Yeah. And you have them on rigs. They're motion controlled. So you
motion controlled rigs. So one of the biggest things is we want to ensure overlap. We need somewhere between 60 and 80% overlap between each image to match those features and create that photogrammetric model. And humans make mistakes. So when doing photogrammetry, if you can use a robot to control some of it, it limits the error on site.
Something I thought was interesting is, the data set you have and the models you've built can make something like this, a 3D printed, scaled small model of a location, which then you get to appreciate some of the details in a certain way. And even in the VR environment or even on a computer screen, you can have a small model, but you've chosen to put everything at 1-to-1 scale. Even the artifacts that you've done photogrammetry modeling. Why was that, and what do you think that brings to the experience?
Well, I think we wanted to kind of put people in the site like you were there, and then as you go through the site, you listen to audio clips from archaeologists, conservators, park rangers. So we wanted the experience of like going to the site and getting that kind of personal tour. So that's why there's that kind of one-to-oneness and really like that, giving you that sense that like you're really there.
I love part of your scans. There are literally signs that are over there saying "Do not cross."
Yeah,
and I
you can cross it. Yeah, one of the advantages and parts of those sites that you get to go to, like this area in Mount Rushmore, you never can go up there. Well, as close as you can get to the actual sculptures is on the viewing platform about half a mile away. But we've taken you right up under the heads, which is a restricted area. There's lots of security that wouldn't prevent you from getting up there, but you get an up close and personal look at the heads, which is an amazing experience because they're much more impressive when you're up close and you can see the actual carving marks of the original sculptors.
What was the purpose of that original document? Why did you work with the National Park System? How did you get that contract?
Yeah, we worked with the Park Service. It was part of a project that was called the Scottish 10, where the Scottish government also helped fund our work at Mount Rushmore, and we actually gave that data to the Park Service to help with their structural analysis, deformation analysis. They also have a very accurate, like, kind of as-built of what's there today. So all that was done in conjunction with the Park Service. A lot to help with their conservation efforts there. Now we get the chance to open it up.
And you have extra data. You talk about sound clips, 360 photos.
Yeah.
Now, audio is an important part of VR, and that's something that you maybe you wouldn't be capturing if you weren't making something for VR. So
exactly.
What are you now thinking about going forward when you go to new sites this year, next year, and beyond? And what are you capturing that's going to support?
Yeah, there's that whole narrative layer that we never captured before. We were always focused on firstly capturing the geometry and then the geometry and the textures, and now we're trying to capture ambient audio, interviews with local experts. So we're trying to capture the story of the place as well, and also the other senses that you might not have just got through the visual piece. But we keep adding these layers on, and I think it adds to that kind of immersion and that kind of storytelling aspect that we're trying to bring to the experience.
It's an interesting idea that you guys are a little more future-proof than a lot of games might be, because their assets are they're rendered to what we have today, the technology that they're rendering for.
Yeah.
You have rendered at a much higher degree, so it'd be interesting, if a generation or two from now, you've got the data already.
Like 8K headsets or whatever the next generation headset is, we could have that. We probably already have that texture and geometry data that would fuel that. We're just waiting for the computing power and memory to allow us to even load it into these experiences or build an experience around it. But I think the visual fidelity is already there.
And as the technology becomes more democratized in terms of the workflow, and you can use DSLRs, you don't necessarily need LiDAR, people can make their own photogrammetry scans. And would you have any tips or recommendations for someone if they wanted to go on a backpacking trip and bring a camera, bring a drone, and use reality capture? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, you can do it with your cell phone and get amazing results. When we're in the field, the most important thing is to have clear images. And that's, I think, the biggest mistake people make. They think you can just run around and take your photos. But take the extra 5 minutes, put it on a tripod, shoot at a constant aperture, shoot all manual at the same exposure, and your results will really improve.
Do you see photogrammetry catching up to LiDAR in terms of the resolution of the geometry it can detect, or never?
You want to answer?
I think it's come along.
Almost there.
It's almost there. It's come along much further than I ever thought.
Huh.
I think for measurable accuracy, I think like LiDAR is still the way to go. But as you get, if you're getting to these 100 megapixel sensors, you're constructing geometry that you wouldn't have got a year or two ago.
Yeah.
So it's for most purposes, especially for visual purposes like VR, like probably photogrammetry is fine. For the types of things we're trying to do in terms of like meeting the needs of the heritage community and like quantifiable accuracy, we probably still need LiDAR.
Yeah.
Right, and maybe in the future, if we're talking about video cameras that can shoot at high frame rates with global shutters, then you can just run video and have it all solved in post.
Absolutely, and we're already seeing that, being able to run video through it. Obviously, the fidelity is not there, but yeah, very soon I'm sure we're going to be able to simplify the process even more.
That is super cool. Thank you so much for giving us some insight on the very high end of photogrammetry and its applications in VR, and congratulations on your launch.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
So the Masterworks VR app, right? These 4 locations, what did you think?
Well, I thought they were pretty cool. I mean, it's definitely the best photogrammetry that I've seen. It's interesting to see what the limitations are of running it in VR, because while I think it kind of complements one another. The texture detail in the VR app, while the best I've seen, still isn't quite as sharp as I want to see. But I feel more like I've been to these spaces than I expected to have. What did you think?
I think that the aspect of presence is there, but it feels like you're in a representation of it, as if someone built a movie set version
but not
of this location.
Not a game engine representation.
No,
like,
no, that's right.
What's cool.
The game engine, when you think of like a game designer building a level for video games, they are building geometry and building it with polygons, right?
And everything's intentional.
Intentional, absolutely. Hard edges are hard edges. Here, because they have to reduce the amount of detail for VR, and they're putting more detail in some locations than others, things look a little chunky.
But and the scans are naturally, they're organic. I mean, you're getting bobs and blobs and crevices that are just naturally there. And in that sense, it feels more realistic, even if the textures are low res.
And there are things that they talked about incorporating the audio that absolutely helped.
Yeah.
The sense of immersion when we were underneath the Mount Rushmore, right? And that's a location that none of us would probably ever go to, under the nose of one of the presidents.
No, normally you're a mile away and having to view it from that far.
It's an experience that, again, I think even 360 photos or videos couldn't put us in that space. And in fact, I wanted to go further.
I wanted to fly. Like, I think that would be an interesting unlockable for a title like this. If I go to see every space, suddenly now I have a new ability and I can get a new advantage point. Now, I understand game developers would hate that because I can now see behind all of this scaffolding that you don't want me to see the unrealistic perspectives. But I would love to be able to get my own perspective on that space and do things that I can't do even in reality.
It's an interesting debate on what is a realistic representation, right? Whether it's computer generated, procedurally generated, using some type of photogrammetry modeling, or if someone just measured all the reference and then modeled it by hand, it would be cleaner, but would it be considered authentic?
Yeah. What's more brute force, like measuring everything and reconstructing it, or doing the laborious scans that these guys did using quadcopters and medium format $100,000 cameras?
Now, something we alluded to and something we hope that they're going to embark on in the future is incorporating a fusion of the lighting and the texture that they have on location with what's offered by computer graphics.
Yeah.
Dynamic lighting, being able to say, change the time of day, spatial audio, like things that can really enhance the feeling of presence. That's something that was missing.
I thought that was an interesting tease too, because we asked a little bit about that real-time lighting, and they decided not to use it because it's so laborious to delight, which was
flatten everything
that's
out.
A new phrase, and as well, adding all that realistic lighting. I'm sorry, real-time lighting is its own form of labor. So it'll be cool to see them do that with their next generation.
It really feels like we're being transported to a very specific moment in time.
Yeah.
This time of day, baked in light, baked in geometry, baked in audio. As opposed to a living, breathing environment.
I gotta say, it's so much more delightful than a 360 photo.
Totally.
Because I have that positional tracking, which is what bugs me about 360 photos. Even the ones that they include in this app, even though they are super high res, once I am transported 360 photo, I'm so used to moving my head and having that natural movement that I now feel constricted. So I love photogrammetry from that standpoint alone. I really feel much more free, and you are, to move anywhere that you want.
Now, something we can compare and contrast this application with was another app that was released earlier, also on the Oculus platform. It's via the Smithsonian Institution, and it's a tour of Venice, Italy.
Have you ever been?
I've actually, yes, yeah.
Oh, wow.
I went over 10 years ago. Don't remember much of it.
Yeah.
But this is actually a guided tour via 360 video.
Right, so this gets back to like the discomfort that you have when you are locked in space and you can no longer have that positional tracking of your head. Now you're back to like a Gear VR experience, something, or maybe even like the DK1. You're limited to this one position. However, I felt like the 360 video was some of the best that I've seen. It was definitely low res. You know, I don't know what it's going to take to get higher resolution 360 video, but it's clearly more than my computer is capable of doing right now. The app is 19 gigabytes.
Yeah,
and you're
because
still,
it's video.
And but it's still this like low res video.
It's
funny.
stereoscopic video.
Yeah.
They have dozens of them, and I think what makes this app compelling is the narrative, the narration.
Totally.
You know, they have a history professor lecture and give you a guided tour, essentially, very cognizant of the fact that he's being filmed by 360 video. So you'll walk around the camera. You're encouraged to look around. And that's where I think both this app and also the Masterworks, that app with their the narrative pieces, the audio sound bites, the things that you can pull out, that's what's going to make travel in VR compelling.
Yeah, I felt like there's pros and cons to both of these approaches, and if the limitation of being stuck in one place is one of the cons of 360 video, the constant animation of the world makes it certainly makes it feel more like you're in a living space.
Yeah.
And I liked that there were people on the Venetian streets walking past the camera, having a conversation. You know, these are things that game developers would never want because it's distracting to the subject, but it felt very realistic. Also, moving in the gondola through the cities, I expected it to be a little more nauseating than it was. They made some great choices about what to stabilize and what not to.
Both of these applications I thought also could benefit from some type of multiplayer, some type of social experience.
Yeah.
It'd be fun to explore these spaces with someone else in VR and hear the audio and get the ambient 360 video. So none of them I think hit it perfectly yet, and people are still learning what the best way to tap into travel in VR, but these are both experiences I think you guys should try out to at least see what's out there if you have a VR headset, and thankfully they're both free.
Exactly, yeah, there's no reason not to. And I think this is a taste of the future of education. You know, if like Ready Player One got me excited about one thing, it's that kids who go to school might someday be able to take field trips wherever they want in their classroom, and that's pretty darn exciting.
It makes me want to bring a camera wherever I go, or a quadcopter, and start documenting areas, this experiment in photogrammetry myself. Yeah. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week with another spotlight on an aspect of VR or AR, but subscribe to our YouTube channel, like this video, and we'll see you then.
Bye.